Modern physics is built on a mathematical collision. When theoretical frameworks try to map the continuous, sweeping manifolds of relativity onto the highly discrete, quantized structures of particle mechanics, the equations break. They generate infinite thermodynamic divergences. Within the Standard Model and quantum field theory, absolute infinity is overwhelmingly treated as a computational error. It signifies a catastrophic breakdown of predictive power that physicists must manually extract from their models using complex renormalization procedures. This diagram shows the standard workaround used in classical non-Abelian gauge theories. To patch the continuous-discrete divide, the mathematics isolates what are known as Faddeev-Popov Ghosts. These are fictitious fields designed purely to cancel out unphysical degrees of freedom. They possess entirely contradictory properties, following Fermi-Dirac statistics while retaining integer spin. Because they violate the spin statistics theorem, these ghost fields can never manifest as observable particles. The scientific community explicitly acknowledges them as imaginary, non-physical figments of mathematical imagination, acting solely as negative degrees of freedom to maintain the S matrix. By building reality from the bottom up, presupposing an empty set or fundamental particles, classical physics traps itself. It creates a continuous-discrete paradox that forces the invention of imaginary mathematical ghosts to prevent total computational collapse. The theory of infinity, developed by Ryan E.S. Charmley and Steve Conrad, initiates a complete cosmological inversion of this standard. Rather than treating infinity as an anomaly requiring renormalization, this topological framework establishes absolute infinity as the active pre-ontological primitive and the generative engine of the cosmos. To understand the magnitude of this epistemological rupture, we have to look back at our historical resistance to the infinite. The Aristotelian paradigm expressly denied the physical existence of actual infinity, arguing it was logically incompatible with a bounded, observable cosmos. Even when George Cantor introduced the rigorous mechanics of transfinite numbers and proved actual infinite hierarchies exist mathematically, physical cosmology largely failed to absorb the revolution. General relativity and quantum mechanics continued to treat infinite boundaries as the exact points where physical laws fail. To resolve this, the theory of infinity introduces the friction versus fiction protocol. This mechanism aggressively redefines the imaginary mathematical figments of classical physics. Native topological friction functions as a highly structured, latent invariant domain, actively governing the emergence of physical reality from the void. This table contrasts the QFT mathematical fiction paradigm with the TOI topological friction paradigm. Instead of ad hoc regularizers, TOI operates on the discrete sync gauge substrate. Notice the redundancy resolution. QFT invents Faddeev-Popov Ghosts, while TOI resolves excess through native boundary dynamics. In the derivation of the photon, mapping the asymmetric sync gauge modulus to Wigner's little group natively annihilates continuous translational degrees of freedom. The boundary physically constricts the wave, sharing away excess movement and leaving exactly one pure rotational subgroup. Because this redundancy is destroyed organically by real topological friction rather than an imaginary figment, it leaves a measurable physical signature. The framework predicts a highly specific 1.738% topological suppression. That 1.738% suppression is an exact thermodynamic residual that can be cross-referenced directly against the continuous observable of the Thomson scattering cross-section. Because the native spatial geometry destroys the translational redundancy organically, there is zero mathematical need to insert a causal ghost. The supposed figment of classical physics is unmasked as literal, measurable topological friction. To track where this measurable friction originates, we must look at the pre-epistemic state of the universe. The continuous void begins as a noisy sky, a turbulent state defined by the violent collision between expansive acute and compressive grave spatial tangents. Striking discrete geometry, chaotic waves initiate a pinch event at the central chevron fold. Unresolved volume undergoes a topological reflection, collapsing inward to convert into thermodynamic tension. Conserving this immense friction, the universe folds it into a non-physical latent domain, the mental bubble. This mental bubble resides outside local Euclidean geometry, but it possesses intense causal power. Regulated by the valve of tension, it severely alters the trajectories of surrounding spatial waves without ever manifesting as an observable physical particle. This mental bubble acts as a structured, non-physical topological reservoir of extreme kinetic and thermodynamic tension. It exerts the real torsional pull on Euclidean space that classical QFT attempts to account for with imaginary mathematical ghosts. If this latent domain stores such massive torsional energy, how does the universe bind this chaotic, continuous exhaust to observable physical space without triggering an infinite series collapse? This equation defines the mechanism, the prime logarithmic anchor. By elevating standard Fibonacci ratios into a dynamic exponential manifold, the TOI proves that continuous exponential fluid inherently self-regulates when bounded by golden sequence coefficients, snapping natively onto rigid logarithmic phase states. When you factor the matrix, the positive real solution isolates the exact spatial boundaries. As the sequence ascends, it converges absolutely to the double golden ratio +1. This numerical value acts as the continuous boundary limit and the naked thermodynamic anchor of the physical universe. But the mathematical home of the TOI figment lies in the remaining negative root. Evaluating the natural logarithm of a negative number forces the spatial coordinate to fracture out of Euclidean space entirely. The exhaust is ejected into the complex plane, generating a full logarithmic lattice. The complex plane acts as the mathematical reservoir for the continuous void. The chaotic exhaust organizes itself natively through perfect pi-I resonances, capturing the intense torsional pull of the mental bubble. This animated diagram demonstrates the ultimate synthesis of continuous thermodynamics and discrete geometry, the Euler-Tribonacci Bridge. Here, Euler's constant, representing the continuous vacuum permittivity, is squeezed through a structural sieve of discrete Tetranacci integers. By expanding the continuous exponential vacuum against these discrete limits, the framework produces a pure quadratic equation for the transcendental constant E. The mathematics reveal that Euler's constant can be geometrically approximated by the square root of the 9th Lucas number, offset entirely by a discrete hexatic container. This continuous to discrete projection natively reconstructs the three-dimensional volumetric spatial mass of the Tribonacci constant. Sequence mass is rigorously conserved as it flattens onto dimensional planes, preserving the exact geometry of causal force. The empirical evaluation of this bridge leaves behind exactly one trace element, a microscopic log residual gap of approximately 0.000302. This specific thermodynamic exhaust represents the ultimate topological boundary friction of the universe. The friction versus fiction protocol fulfills its mandate. The theory of infinity strictly maps physical causality directly to topological geometry, proving that the universe achieves absolute equilibrium without manual regularizers. Now, the continuous discrete paradox is structurally resolved. The imaginary causal ghost has been fully exorcised, replaced entirely by the exact, unyielding, and mechanically falsifiable geometry of the absolute void.